How do you actually build muscle and lose fat at the same time in the most effective way possible? That is what I'm going to break down for you in this video. First, we have to understand that for body recompositioning, who is it actually best to make this your primary goal? So instead of focusing just on bulking, lean gaining, or focusing just on cutting, when is it a good idea to make this, both at the same time, your primary goal? Well, there's a few scenarios. Number one is complete beginners. Complete beginners by default should be able to recomposition anyways. You can gain muscle at such a quick rate that if you enter a slight deficit in the process, you're going to lose fat and build muscle at the same time. Even if you stay at maintenance, fat loss will occur or muscle gain will occur so rapidly that it'll look like you have less fat on you, okay? Recompositioning basically happens by default if you're a beginner, so this should be your primary target. If you're detrained, that essentially puts you back into roughly beginner territory in the sense that even if you've been training for 10 years, but you took a hiatus from training, whether it's because of injury, illness, or something else, that just falling off, for example, then that would put you in the category of detrained, which means you can gain back muscle very quickly and lose body fat in that process because of it. Next is if you are extremely overweight or obese. These individuals have a lot of stored excess energy. That's what body fat is. And so therefore, they are in a position where even if they're in a decent deficit, they will burn off a lot of that body fat and a lot of that energy can be used towards the building of muscle, assuming that your training and everything else is on point. We're going to talk about all that shortly, okay? Now, the next one is something that so many people overlook constantly, and some people are beginners for 10 years because they don't realize that they are sub-optimized trainees. In other words, they've been training for 10 years, but just not correctly, not optimally whatsoever. They haven't even milked out their beginner gains yet, which means they're technically still able to make rapid progress, assuming they dial those things in, assuming they now go from sub-optimized trainees to optimized trainees, which is what my entire channel and content is helping you to hopefully do. So if you fall into this category, just like I did maybe 6 or 7 years into my journey, I didn't actually make that much muscle gains because a lot of what I was doing was completely suboptimal and in fact just detrimental to where I started tightening up some screws and recompositioning happened very quickly as a result. And that could actually be several years into your training journey. It really depends on how optimized things have really been and how consistent they've been as well, of course. Now, advanced trainees can recomposition. So even if you are an optimized trainee, and you've milked out all of your beginner gains, you're not detrained, you're not overweight, you're in a good position and you're cutting and bulking, the truth is you also could main gain, as the term has been used over the recent years, and main gaining essentially means staying at roughly a maintenance or a similar level of body fat for an entire period for several months, let's say, but gaining muscle and losing fat over time during that process. This is actually possible based on the data we now have for advanced trainees to accomplish. But with that said, the data will also show that it is still inferior to cutting and bulking cycles done correctly. Okay, so keep that in mind if you are anywhere outside of a complete beginner, i.e. somebody that's been training suboptimally or not at all or obese at the same time, then it's probably best to be doing cutting and bulking cycles for yourself. Now, something that's very important to understand, just to paint the picture for you, you've got the three most important variables, three cornerstones, if you will: nutrition, training, and sleep. Now, when it comes to recompositioning, actually the most important thing, and when we talk about optimized or sub-optimized trainees, the most important variable is actually your training. So it doesn't matter how well you eat, doesn't matter how much protein you eat, it doesn't matter how well you sleep. If there's no training stimulus for growth, then growth cannot occur. And if growth cannot occur, then you will gain or lose weight, but it will just basically be purely body fat. Or if you lose weight, it will also be muscle because there's no stimulus to actually retain the muscle. So training is the most important variable when it comes to building your best physique. Just flat out, that is a reality. Nutrition and sleep are still essential and so important and often overlooked, but training really is the most important factor that needs the most optimization and consistency to consistently make the most out of your nutrition and sleep. So to illustrate the point, you have three scenarios. One person doesn't train at all or completely suboptimally, but their nutrition and their sleep is basically on point. Just a hypothetical here, as typically that would never be the case. That person would see extremely poor or even no results. Whereas if you had optimized proper training, we're going to break that down shortly here, what that looks like, and either your nutrition wasn't on point or your sleep wasn't on point, or even potentially both aren't really that consistent or on point, you can still see far better results than this scenario here. However, obviously, having all three of these on point will lead to the fastest and best possible results always. So with that said, let's talk about the most important variable, which is the training. How do we actually set this up? Obviously, I'm going to have several videos, and already do, covering training in depth on how to program appropriately, volume. I've got a volume video on it, all this type of stuff. But if I were to summarize it in a way that encompasses the main key points to an effective training regimen that'll help you recomposition, assuming you're in these camps, it's going to look like this. 3 to 6 times per week of proper resistance training. So no going to classes, doing HIIT workouts, and doing any sort of other training that is exercise but not training doesn't count. We're talking 3 to 6 times of actual resistance training done properly. For volume parameters, that's going to look somewhere between 3 to 10 sets per muscle group per week, more than likely, across 3 to 6 sessions total. 0 to 2 reps in reserve. What does that mean? Full intensity needs to be there on a per set basis. Every single set is taken in very, very close proximity to failure, or even to complete failure. So 2 to 5 minutes of rest, 2 to 5 minutes of rest time between sets is going to be ideal to maximize your intensity performance out of the volume that you do set per muscle group. And you need to track and progress throughout these training sessions. Using an app can help you do all of this stuff. Most apps out there will help you do one thing, like just track your training, just track your nutrition, but I actually offer one that helps you do all of it together with my experience and knowledge and coaching included in that. It's called Elite Physique. So you can check out the link in my bio and see and get all the features streamlined into one app. It helps you optimize training. It'll all be programmed by me as well. So you have the training sessions you need with the right amount of volume and intensity. And you can go about seeing progress and recomposition as quickly as possible. Once again, check the link in my bio for that. Now that the training is understood, hopefully, and on point, we're going to move on to the nutrition, obviously extremely important still. So for this, you've got 2 different categories you're going to fall into. And this is really going to depend on what your starting point is as far as how much body fat you have, okay? Now, again, we're going to assume you don't have all that much muscle, because if you do, and you actually are intermediate or advanced, you shouldn't be recompositioning necessarily if you want the fastest results possible. So you have somewhat small amounts of muscle currently, and you are 15% body fat or less as a male, which would translate to around 23% body fat or less as a female. What this means is, in your body recompositioning, your primary target, what you're actually pushing for the most, is muscle gain. However, it's not a complete bulk, as you're about to see, but just know that your primary target is building muscle because you don't have all that much fat in the first place, right? So in order to recomposition as quickly as possible for you, it will mean that building muscle is the fastest way to accomplish it. Now, you're going to set your calories at around maintenance or perhaps a 5% surplus. This just simply means at maintenance or perhaps slightly above on some days. And within those calories, you want to set your protein targets between 0.7 and 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. It's really up to you, depending on what you can tolerate, what you prefer, all within that range. If you ask me, I'm always going to recommend a slightly higher intake of protein. 25% of your calories can come from fats, and carbs are going to fill in the rest of that, okay? Now, because of this, you're staying at maintenance, you can grow muscle quickly, and therefore you won't be putting on any excess body fat whatsoever. That's why you're recompositioning. You don't have a ton of fat anyways, so it'll help, and you'll probably lose fat in the process as you build the muscle because of all the energy required to do so. Now, if you're on the opposite side of the fence, for example, you still have a low amount of muscle mass, you lean more towards the overweight or obese category, so let's say that you are above 15% body fat as a man and above 23% body fat as a woman, especially far above these numbers, by the way, then of course your main target here is fat loss. That is what's going to show the biggest difference for your body, is because you have a large amount of fat to lose. If you focus on a bigger deficit to achieve fat loss faster and you optimize your training, you can actually synthesize muscle in that process anyways. That will reveal the best results for you. So your primary target here is actually fat loss, which means you're going to enter a 10% deficit. So it's a very slight deficit once again, simply because you have the stored energy that's going to basically be enough for you to synthesize and build muscle along that process. You're going to set your protein a little bit higher though. So 1 gram to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. Once again, my recommendation, if you can tolerate it and you have no issues, is going to be on the higher end for satiety purposes, for thermic effect, and all these other benefits, right? 20% of fats, so slightly lower than over here, to help with making sure you're in the deficit. Carbs will fill in the rest, as carbs are utterly important when it comes to performance, retaining or building muscle in the gym, okay? 80 to 90% of your food should be nutrient dense regardless of where you fall in here, or basically regardless of where you fall ever at any moment in your life. 80 to 90% nutrient dense foods is always the way to go. So we now understand you're training to a large sort of bird's eye level view. We now understand the nutrition here, hopefully to a large degree. Any questions you have on this, drop them down below. Again, my Elite Physiques app will also help you in optimizing all of this, whether your goal is build muscle or lose fat, depending on which camp you fall in here. Now, when it comes to the basic sleep and hydration aspect, this is very straightforward. 8 to 9 hours of sleep consistently will get you the fastest possible results. I do have another video on sleep that's either come out already or is coming out to break it down further. 2 liters of water should be your absolute bare minimum no matter who you are, but from there, it's going to vary massively from individual to individual. So how you find that out is by starting at 2 liters minimum, if you're not there yet, and working your way up by, say, half a liter week after week until you get to a point that makes sense and feels best for you. Now, what do you do from here? You understand how to eat. You understand how to set up your macros, your nutrition, nutrient-dense foods for the most part. You understand basically from a high-level view what proper training looks like. You understand the importance of training. You understand if it's a good idea to even set these, and depending on what side or where you may fall within this, which direction to push towards the most. So what do we do from here? How long do you actually recomposition for? I suggest that you do this for between 3 to 6 months, because during this process, not only are you building muscle, losing fat at the same time, so looking, performing, and feeling better, but you're also practicing the habits of optimizing and dialing all of these things in, tracking them hopefully as well, and as a result, having them optimized consistently and building that habit, which means after 3 to 6 months of doing so, not only have you changed your physique dramatically, but you've also changed your habits, your outlook on how all of this works, your control how all of it works, and therefore you've probably started to exit whatever camp you were in at the beginning of this, which means now it's probably a good idea to start considering switching to cut and bulk cycles. In which case, if you're wondering how to do that, maybe you're already getting to that point, make sure you check out my videos on how to bulk, how to cut 101 with all the science and data you need behind them. And you'll go ahead and be able to make that transition here, because that is far more effective once you're out of these camps. I hope that makes sense. And that is basically all you need to do to effectively set up your recompositioning strategy for the one that makes the most sense for you. You can see the fastest change in your body composition possible while dialing in the habits, the mindset, and the key elements you need to set yourself up for success in the long term as far as building a top 1% physique all natural. I hope that you enjoyed the video and learned a ton. If you have any questions regarding any of this, like I mentioned, drop them in the comments below. I'm happy to answer you there. And one last thing, like I mentioned, I've got Elite Physiques to help you accelerate through all of this stuff. Instead of spending 3 to 6 months just learning how to do it, you can go ahead and check that out, link in the description, as well as some free resources you can check out too. Once again, thank you so much for watching the video. I will catch you in the next one. I'm out.